Very good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for joining us for our second last session for the AI for Social Good Summit. We're so happy to have you as part of this session, which is going to be focusing on the challenge of governance in the artificial intelligence space. Is creating policy, is creating governance and accountability, the same thing for artificial intelligence as it has been for other new technologies? Is it different? Are there new things that we ought to be thinking about and doing when it comes to that? That's going to be a big piece of our panel discussion today. Now, as you might know, at this point, this session is part of a broader program across the whole month, the AI for Social Good Month, where we have been doing a series of kind of talks and conversations on the challenges of leveraging artificial intelligence, for social good, as well as kind of preventing some of the challenges or potential risks in that space. So not just, thinking about how do we prevent the harms and the risks, but also how do we leverage artificial intelligence really for social good in the Asia region. Now, this program and the summit is jointly developed by Google, United Nations SCAP, and APRU in partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation. We're very grateful for all of their support. If you would like to go deeper into some of these topics, you may have seen we have this report that is downloadable from the APRU AI for Social Good website. And it covers, you've got papers on a variety of topics. How do we write Buddhism into artificial intelligence, which Suraj, one of our speakers today, is a contributor on that topic. Fascinating paper, but also some very pragmatic papers on how do we design policy, or what does it look like to create policy that enables prototyping and kind of more iterative approaches to deploying technology for the good of society. Now, today, as part of our discussion, we're going to have three parts. So the first one is a discussion between all of you. This program today has brought together a variety of people from different parts of the region. And I've been seeing also people outside of this region who've been joining who are interested in this topic. And so we thought it would be nice to spend a few minutes just to get to know each other, to meet some of the other people who are here with us in this room together. The second piece is going to be a moderated discussion, and it'll be a panel and a Q&A on the topic of accountability and regulation in artificial intelligence. And then the last piece, and for those of you who have taken an interest in some of the country breakouts, we are looking to host potentially 4 breakouts. So for participants from China, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, if you stick around afterwards, we will be adding you into a breakout room that will enable you to meet some of the other stakeholders in your own country and to get a discussion started. Now, for this first piece, what we're going to do is we're going to do a brief breakout session. We're going to take about 8 minutes in total, and we're going to put you in a small group together. It'll probably be about 5 people, and we'd like you to do 2 things. So number 1, introduce yourself. Where are you located? What is your organization and role? And 2 is, what's your interest in this whole area of governance and regulation in artificial intelligence, right? So question 1, to introduce yourself, and question 2 is what is your interest in this space? These are going to be the 2 things that we'll be doing in this breakout, and we'll take about 8 minutes just to get a chance to meet some of the other people as part of this session. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to head into breakout rooms in 3, 2, and 1. Welcome back. I hope you had the opportunity to make some interesting connections. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to hand things over to our moderator for the day. So our moderator is Professor Toni Erskine, who's the director of the Coral Bell School of Asia Pacific Affairs at the Australian National University. She's also the editor of International Theory and an associate fellow with the Leverhulme. Toni, you'll have to perhaps pronounce correct my pronunciation on this. Leverhulme Center. Oh, fantastic. Center for the Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge. Toni, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cal. And again, welcome everyone to the governance session on accountability and regulation. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm really pleased to be able to also introduce you to three eminent speakers who are here with me today on the panel. What I think I'm going to do is ask each of the three just to give a 30-second self-introduction to give us a sense of their background and what they're interested in this area. So if I may, I think I'm going to start with Professor Saraj Hongladaram, who's Professor of Philosophy and Director of the Center for Ethics of Science and Technology at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. And I hope I got that close enough to being correct, Saraj. But if I could pass over to you for just 30 seconds to tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Okay, thank you, Tony, for the kind introduction. I'm teaching philosophy at the Department of Philosophy at Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok for close to 30 years, and my interest is around ethics of technology. And I'm currently director, as Tony said, Center for Ethics of Science and Technology. We are in the process of changing our title, so it will become Center for Science, Technology, and Society very soon. So yeah, nice to be able to participate in this session.
It's wonderful to have you here. So our next participant, Dini Fronitasari, who is here from the Agency for the Assessment and Application of Technology, BPPT, in the Indonesian government. Dini, if you could just give us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, thank you, Tony. Okay, thank you for the time. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dini Fronitasari from the Agency for the Assessment and Application of Technology in Indonesia, Government Research Institute, which has the task of carrying out government duties in the field of the assessment and application of technology, and priority the partnership through maximum utilization for technology and engineering output. So here I represent the Chief of BPPT, Mr. Hamam Reza, to maybe explain about the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy from the perspective of accountability and regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dini. And our third speaker, I will just pass over to Zvika Krieger, who's Director of Responsible Innovation at Facebook. Zvika.
Hello, everyone, and thank you to the organizers and for inviting me to speak here with all of you today. My name is Vika Krieger, and I, as Tony mentioned, I'm the Director of Responsible Innovation at Facebook, where we work with our product teams across Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, our various products to ensure that make sure that our products are benefiting society and anticipating and mitigating any harm that our products may cause. This topic is very near and dear to my heart because before joining Facebook, I spent most of my career working for the US government at the US State Department and the US Defense Department, where I worked on technology policy in a wide range of areas, including artificial intelligence. And then also before joining Facebook, worked at the World Economic Forum, where I worked with about 30 different governments to help develop forward-leaning policies around emerging technologies like AI. And so very much looking forward to this conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Zvika. I might actually start with you with our discussion with a question and pick up on something that you mentioned in your self-introduction, about preventing harm. Now, part of regulating AI is anticipating harms from products that we may have never seen before, we may have never used before. How does Facebook do this? And then I'll have a follow-on question as well. But if we can start, how do we anticipate these harms from these products that are new to us?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think that if you're looking at emerging technologies, we have a sense of how they're developing today, but really preventing harm for these technologies is not just about the harm, the context in which we're currently in, but you really need to develop the capability of think into the future. How might these technologies be used in the future? Because you're not just designing for today's users, you're designing for tomorrow's users. And so there is this discipline of foresight, speculative design, future scenario planning that is pretty familiar in the business world, and you have a lot of companies that will use these techniques to try and anticipate future market trends and identify market opportunities. And at Facebook, and something you're seeing increasingly in private sector companies, is that foresight is not just a series of tools and frameworks for identifying market opportunities, but also an opportunity to anticipate potential harms. That if you think about different ways in which different trajectories for these technologies, different ways that technologies might develop, different contexts in which these technologies might be operating, that helps broaden your horizon as you think about what might be the different uses for these technologies. And so we've been trying to use a lot of these foresight, scenario planning, speculative design tools and techniques to help us think about not just today's use cases, but future use cases as well, which is something that has been really helpful in better anticipating risks. And I would say that the other important approach that we use at Facebook is thinking about a broader range of users. That the people who design technology are often not the people that are using technology. And particularly at a company like Facebook, where we have over 3 billion people using our products almost every day, that's a really broad range of people. And so if you want to anticipate unexpected or unintended risks, you have to have more voices around the table. And so there's different ways in which you can do that. Number one is we really need diversity within technology companies, right? That we need to diversify the types of people who are designing technology, creating technology, developing technology. That's, within big tech companies like Facebook, as we grow our global footprint and really put action behind our words in terms of our commitment to diversity. It's not just about diversity for the sake of diversity, but about bringing in all of those different perspectives so that we can better anticipate the ways in which our products, the full range of ways in which our products might be used by good actors and by bad actors. And so increasing diversity both within big technology companies like Facebook, but also just developing technology ecosystems around the world so that it's not just here in Silicon Valley where I'm based, but that we have people around the world who are developing technology so their voices can help us better understand how technology is going to develop. But I think it's also important that even if as we work to diversify our companies, we also diversify the types of people that we engage with. And so one of the things that my team does at Facebook is goes and brings in those diverse voices, those global perspectives, brings in experts from around the world, brings in critics, brings in particularly voices from underrepresented and marginalized communities, vulnerable populations whose voices are usually not around the table, because they're the ones who can help broaden the aperture for us around how do we think about, what are all the ways in which our products might be used or misused.
That's fantastic, Zvika. I do have a follow-up question. I think we had people who will be listening, from government as well. And you've given us some fascinating insights from your work in Facebook about, foresight, anticipating risks. Are there practices or structural elements that you think could be useful for governments to consider employing themselves? So are there lessons from Facebook that you could say, governments should be trying to do this as well?
I would say that particularly foresight is, strategic foresight, speculative design, future scenario planning is something that governments really do need to harness. I can say from my time in government that, for most policymakers, they're not technologists and don't have a strong understanding of technology, but policy is almost always lagging behind technology. And I think that the policymaking process is in most countries by design, slow, deliberate, inclusive, and as it should be, right? We're making policies for millions of people that's going to affect people's lives. We need to be deliberate in how we make policy. And so, one way that you can help technology, but of course, we also, the flip side is that if policy is always lagging behind technology, then you have a policy vacuum, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, of what are the risks of having these technologies not being effectively regulated. And so the flip side is that you could have sort of reactive policy or like outdated policies that are being applied to like policies for old technologies that are being now applied to new technologies because we don't have sort of updated policies. And so, one way to address that gap is to make the policy making process faster. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the conversation. But I think that another way is to start the policy making process earlier, right? So if you can see what's coming down the pipeline, you don't just have to wait for the technology to get here and be in general circulation, and then to start thinking about how you might regulate or govern that technology. You need to be thinking about, if you can start earlier when you see it coming down the pipeline, you can get that slow, inclusive, deliberative policymaking process started earlier. And so I think that if governments can refine that skill set and really use those tools that have been used in the private sector for many years, and there are actually parts of government that do often use these kind of tools. And I actually started my career in the military that is actually quite good at these kind of foresight exercises. But if we could take some of those tools and bring them into the sort of technology policy making process, I think that that would enable policy to close the gap between technology and policy.
That's great. Thank you very much, Vika. Dini, I think I'll turn to you, if I may. My question for you to start is, how is AI different from other things that regulators might look at? Is AI a new technology just in a long list of technologies, or is it somehow markedly different? I'll start with that, and then I'll follow on from there.
Okay. We need a legal reference so that every person or organization in Indonesia, when they see AI technology, is the same. Therefore, we create Stranas AI and compile a presidential decree to solve it. And then I think a legal reference is needed so that every person or organization, when looking at AI technology, has the same perception. Therefore, we create the national strategy for AI and compile to solve this. In addition, it can also be done by making maybe curriculum for the primary and secondary education levels for long-term needs. So I think this.
No, that's really helpful. Can you say a little bit more, Dini, about how our approach to regulation needs to respond to changes in AI?
Okay. Currently, Indonesia doesn't yet have a national intelligence strategy. The national strategy for AI is very important, as a national policy direction is utilizing developing AI technology in various fields to improve the national economy. The drafting the national strategy for AI must involve the quadruple helix in determining focus area and priority sector. Based on a World Economic Forum, we preparation of a national tech strategy through a SWOT analysis with parameter of manpower, digitalization, infrastructure industry, academic collaboration, training capacity, and regulation for strength and weakness. For the parameter of opportunity and threat are the ecosystem of innovation, industrial adoption, public sector adoption, and international collaboration. So the scoring result of all SWOT parameters, so the grouping of 4 SWOT parameters, namely regulation, capacity building with training and education, increasing innovation and adoption in industry, and we use that for infrastructure based on 4 focus area. We are selected for the national artificial intelligence strategy, namely maybe the one is ethic and policy, talent development, infrastructure and data, industrial research and innovation, and where priority area which are derived from the focus area of research and industrial innovation, like 5, namely is healthy service, bureaucratic reform and education research, food security and mobility and smart cities. This is and talk about accountability when compiling the program according to the ministry program and budget, and there is an oversight committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Dini. I'm going to turn over to Suraj, please. Suraj, my question for you is, well, to start, governments often focus on protecting people from harm. If we want to make sure that we're not just protecting people from AI risks, but also leveraging it for a social good, which I know is important to you, what would that kind of regulation look like? If we're to leverage AI for social good, what would regulation look like in that context? And if you could provide any examples, that would be great.
Yeah. Thank you, Tony. I'm using a new background image. So, and I did not know that the algorithm kind of cut off my hair.
Fine.
So please bear with me. For those of you who might not be familiar, this is the picture of the main campus of my university, the two oldest buildings in the university, not far from where I work. So my work has been to think about the what philosophers call the condition of possibility for successful implementation and ethical implementation of AI. So it fits with your question about what kind of thing needs to be in place in order for AI to really work. So what I think is that we need.
I think Suraj has frozen. I don't think it's just my computer. Cal?
No, he has frozen, unfortunately.
Okay, that was a really interesting answer. So I think what we'll do is we'll come back to Suraj when we can. But while we're just waiting for Suraj to come back, I think, Zvika, I'd like to come back to you if that's possible. And I do have a couple of questions myself for you, but we've also had some questions come in on the chat based on what you were saying in your last answers. One question that we've got is, how does Facebook enable citizens, governments, and diverse communities to signal preferences on what is the future they want and have a say, and go beyond inviting them to provide information in these foresight exercises? So I guess rather going beyond just providing information to actually having some say, signal preferences in terms of the future that they'd like. Is that something that comes into the practices that you're involved in? Zvika, that's a difficult question, but.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that Facebook has, we've really, over the years, aimed to optimize what we call, autonomy and agency, which is letting people control their own experience on the platform. And being transparent about what their choices are, and whenever possible, giving them choices to tailor the experience to being the experience they want to have. And if they're confronting content on the platform that perhaps is something that they don't want to be, they don't want being in their feed, giving them tools to be able to not see that content and to report that content, but to also really empower people to have knowledge, so transparency about what's driving the decisions that are happening on the platform, but also controls, right? Transparency and control are sort of two sides of that same coin, where you also want people to feel empowered to make decisions about what information they share, what information they see, who gets to see that information, and what type of experience they're having. And I think that that becomes particularly important when you're talking about artificial intelligence, because it's not like a one-to-one correlation, where maybe in the past, I gave you information about my shopping behaviors, and so you might just say, okay, well, now you know that I like this red pair of shoes. But when AI, that data gets mixed with lots of other data, and then can create all sorts of predictive outputs that the person who originally gave that data may never have even dreamed of how that data is being used. And I think that going back to something that Dini was saying earlier around sort of public education around AI, I would say that the public's understanding of how AI works is definitely lagging behind the technological developments in AI. And I think that people, your average person, can't really fathom how what AI can do in the world. And I think that people are, and so that increases the responsibility of companies like Facebook to be transparent with our users around what data we're collecting and how we're using it.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Vika. And a good question from the audience. So thank you to that audience member. Saraj, I think we're going to go back to you. You were in the middle of answering the question on how regulation might be used to leverage social good. Do you want to continue with your answer?
Yes, I'm sorry about my internet connection. It was very good until the very moment I'm talking. So I don't know what is happening, but if something happens and I switch to my mobile phone, how what I'm talking about is that there needs to be kind of getting back and forth between the policymakers and the technologists. And the situation is a bit different in Thailand and in other countries in the region because the private companies are not that much advanced as those in the US. So they mostly follow whatever technology that is already there. So and in many cases, the government tends to take a lead in regulation and policy. So the focus is more on how to increase the capability of these technologies, and they are doing quite well. I mean, they are doing better jobs than many people have actually thought they would be capable of doing. So in order to leverage the regulation, I think there should be some both. I think we can emphasize both what I call external regulation, meaning laws and other kinds of mechanisms coming from outside of the technological companies. And what is known as important in my mind, and at least among my colleagues who are rather critical of technology, is that there should be an emphasis, or we should pay, I think, more attention to the what I call internal regulation of within the technological companies themselves. What I have in mind is that for a software company, they need to be, or they are in the business of producing the best software, the best product possible, and that is their raison d'être. They have to compete in the market. So what constitutes the best software possible? And this is where I think we can add the ethical dimension. We can add the social good thing in AI for social good. So the best algorithm must not be one that can perform its kind of narrow function for a particular group of users, but the designer should kind of look around and learn what is going on. And since the software, the algorithm, the whole thing has become very, very powerful, a lot is at stake. And I think power comes with responsibility. So those, I don't mean only private companies, because some branches of the government are doing their own research and development in AI also, not only in Thailand, but in other countries in Asia also. They have to look broader than their kind of quite perhaps narrow function of we are doing only this particular job only. Yeah, I think that is what I'm thinking at the moment.
No, that's fantastic, Saraj. I have a question I want to follow up on. You mentioned with great power comes great responsibility. You also made a distinction between what you called, I think, internal and external regulation. So you're talking about the importance of self-regulation, I think, as well. So that internal regulation.
Yes.
Do you think that some approaches to internal regulation, or do you think that some approaches to self-regulation are more effective than others? So I guess I'm pushing you to say, is all self-regulation good, or are there some approaches to self-regulation that would be better than others?
It depends on the mindset of, I'm sorry, the message, there is a message coming that my internet connection is unstable. So I'm very sorry about this. Just happened because since the beginning, when I made all the preparations with the organizers, nothing happened.
That's always the case, Suraj. Please don't worry. Please continue. And if we lose you, we'll go on to someone else.
Okay. No, thanks. Well, it depends on the mindset. And that is why my paper, which is a chapter in the overall report that Professor Jiro has edited and assembled, called for, I'm looking at a religious perspective. In my case, it's Buddhism. So it's the quality of the mind. It sounds a bit, I don't know whether it is out of place or not, but that's what I'm thinking. I mean, we are talking about motivation, and we are talking about how from the understanding and the awareness of those who are responsible in designing and creating the technology to be kind of responsible, more responsible for their what their product can do for the betterment of society in general. So that is where the ethical element comes in. AI should be able to reduce inequalities, reduce poverty, and realize the UN sustainable goals. We all know about that. Create a world where global warming is being fought and finally defeated, something like that. Broader picture and awareness, motivation. Yes.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Suraj. I'm going to go back to a follow-on question for Zvika, and then Dini, I'll come back to you to start off on a question I think I'll pose to the whole panel. But Zvika, I guess following on from some of the things that Suraj just said about self-regulation, you spoke about addressing anticipated consequences. So, foresight and anticipating risk. My question for you is, how do you address the risk from unanticipated consequences without shutting down innovation? So is there a tension there?
I think that the answer I would say is yes and no, right?
Okay.
The sort of obvious answer is, yes, there may be a tension, right? In the sense that sometimes sort of fully anticipating the risks of your products to society requires you to slow down, and that's just a reality, right? And and I think that in many years, the sort of ethos in Silicon Valley was just a barrel full speed ahead. And I think that as a lot of these tech companies mature, I think there's a recognition that we need to balance that imperative for innovation with the imperative for thinking about our impacts on society. But I think that, to take that question one level deeper, I think that in many ways, innovation and sort of social good, or minimizing harms to society, they aren't in conflict. And I think that number one, I think core to minimizing harm of your products is anticipating as wide a range of users as possible, right? I think that so much of the harm that we're seeing in our products is, or we're seeing in technology products around the world, is when people don't anticipate, the full diversity of folks who will be using your product. And so that there's a moral or an ethical imperative there, but there's also a business imperative there, right? If you're looking to scale your product globally, the more users that you can think of, the more likely that you're going to reach that global scale. And I think some of the most exciting market opportunities we're seeing are in the global south or in emerging markets, which are populations that I think at one point in history, you know, the technology sector may have ignored, but now any innovator, I would say, you know, ignores those markets at their own peril, because some of the most innovative things we're seeing are coming out of those markets. And so, and particularly with the capability now in a lot of those countries of leapfrogging, which is essentially skipping over legacy technologies and going straight to new technologies. I think broadening that aperture it should not come in conflict with market opportunities. And it might even go further and say that some of the biggest innovations of our time have come out of efforts to meet the needs of what one might call like niche populations or communities. You know, just some examples, like a lot of the biggest innovations we saw are for people with special ability, you know, with capability restrictions. So, for example, with physical limitations like turn-by-turn navigation on GPS, which is like a very common technology that we see everywhere now, was initially invented for people with vision impairment, right? And so that's something that, you know, we can't imagine being without, but that was originally seen as like a niche product. And so I think designing for a broader range of users is, I would actually say, a key to innovation, or a sort of shortcut or secret pathway to innovation, rather than something that comes at the conflict of innovation. But to sort of think about, I would say like the way that one of the ways in which we do that at Facebook to make sure that like we're not slowing ourselves down, I think something that works really well in the technology and technology sector, and Tony, you made reference to this early on, is that we have this mindset of prototype, test, and iterate, right? That like rather than like going into your laboratory or into your design studio and, you know, spending all this time and energy designing the perfect product and, you know, making sure every I is dotted and T is crossed, and then you release the product. And then you realize that actually there isn't a product market fit, or the product is not, you know, what you thought people would like it, and they're not using it for some reason. Like we have this mentality in Silicon Valley of, well, why don't we release prototypes? Why don't we release rough versions of our technology, see how it works, and then continuously improve on it? And that's a great strategy for, you know, for getting product market fit, but it also happens to be a great strategy for better anticipating unintended or unanticipated harms, right? That if you're able to take a product and get it out into the world for like a very small subset of users, or a very controlled pilot where you're very closely monitoring the users that are testing something, you can get early signals about where the ways in which a product might have unintended harms. And before you've rolled out the product to the entire world or to a global user base, you've actually, you have those signals so that you can mitigate some of those risks or build in features that can prevent some of those things from happening. And so I think that the Silicon Valley ethos of prototyping, test, and iterate is conducive to anticipating earlier those kinds of risks.
No, that's fascinating. Thank you very much, Vika. And I noticed when you were answering that question and thinking back to your previous answer, that you were saying that one of the things that business can do is sometimes slow down a bit and be more deliberative. And you'd said previously that policy making maybe can become faster. So I thought there was an interesting comparison there. So thank you very much. Dini, if I may come back to you, I'm going to ask all of the panel the following question, and that is, what is one specific and actionable thing that you would like to see policymakers do differently when it comes to regulating AI? So what is one thing that you'd like to see policymakers do differently when it comes to regulating AI? And I'll ask the whole panel, but Dini, I'd really like to start with you.
Okay, thank you, Tony, for the good question. Okay, for this problem, I think we have a talk, of course. For this, we will form a steering and supervisory agency for Stranas AI, which is tasked with monitoring and accountability of the implementation of the strategic program and conducting the technology audit, so that the application is standardized and meet trustworthy AI. which is has been stipulated in the Stranas AI and the presidential regulation, which is still an ongoing process. So I think then it is expected to draw up strategy of national artificial intelligence by independence. Indonesia is be able to complete maybe take the opportunity for development and then utilization for technology and intelligent artificial propensely for the people of Indonesia. I think the strategy of national is required so that development and utilization of technology artificial intelligence can be aligned with the interests of national and have responsibility and that have values based on Pancasila. You know, Pancasila is the basic of Indonesia, and then priority the works of children of the nation in order by sector of industry and the public. That's it.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you very much for that. Suraj, I'm going to ask you the same question. What is one specific and actionable thing that you would like to see policymakers do differently when it comes to the regulation of AI? Suraj?
So regulation for AI, I think the basic parameters for regulation of technology in general could be the same. You know, we aim for safety, we aim for technology not creating harms, and we aim for kind of the environment, social and regulatory environment where technology does the work that is supportive of well-being of the people, but AI being different, as we all know, and it has the capability of acting on their own. People have the image of autonomous cars and autonomous weapon system algorithms that can make or break people's career. Some companies are using algorithms for their hiring, for example. That calls for a more kind of specialized kind of regulation that goes into how the AI algorithm can make itself more explainable and more accountable. I think it should be a goal of technology development in the near future to create AI in such a way that they are able to explain, in human understandable terms, how come they came up with the result that they did come up. In order for them, people to kind of get their way around what AI has been doing. Otherwise, it would be more difficult to create the kind of public trust in general toward the technology as a whole. That's what I
great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Suraj. Zvika, I'm going to turn to you, but before I ask you the final question, we've got a question from the audience as well that I think is for you. And that question, you'd spoken about the importance of diversity previously. Does Facebook go out to underrepresented voices instead of bringing them in? So that's the question we've got from the audience.
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes.
Tell us more about how you do that. Yeah.
I mean, we have teams all over the world. We have offices all over the world. And then we have teams that are devoted, amazing people in Facebook who are from regions from around the world and whose full-time job it is to build relationships, not just with sort of official voices like governments and leaders, but to connect with people on the ground, to make sure that, as was kind of implied in the question, is that there's only a certain kind of type of person that is even able to come to Facebook and come to our offices. I mean, obviously we're living in a virtual world right now, so the landscape is different. But if we really want to understand our users, I mean, we also have an amazing team of user experience researchers, UX researchers, who go out into the field and conduct deep ethnographic research, qualitative research, in addition to all the quantitative research that we conduct on the communities that we engage with, and here speak to them firsthand, and then bring those messages back to our product teams, and are able to capture them in a way that really drives our product decision making. And so I think that as our user base becomes more global, the perspectives that we need to consider need to become more global as well.
No, that's great. Thank you for responding to that. I'll now go back to the question that I've been asking the whole panel. And Zvika, maybe you can draw on your experience in government, military, and now Facebook to give us an answer. What is one specific and actionable thing you would like to see policymakers do differently when it comes to regulating AI? So what's the one thing that you wish they would do differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'll make kind of like a broader point and then give my specific answer to the question. Yeah. I think that I really appreciated what Suraj was saying earlier about governance or self-regulation. And, you know, I think that people are sometimes cynical about that concept because they say, like, you know, well, companies shouldn't be trusted to regulate themselves. And I don't think that anybody is actually arguing that, like, you know, government has no role in ensuring this sort of safe design and deployment of technology. But I would say, like, at Facebook, like, we think of we see policy as the floor, not the ceiling, right? Mm-hmm. That you know, policy says, like, here's the baseline of what you want to of what you need to do in order to be responsible, and we want to aspire to, like, the highest sense of protecting our users and the people who are impacted by our technologies, because and again, this goes back to what Suraj was saying, like, it's about trust, right? Trust is the most valuable currency that we have in terms of our relationships with our users and our customers. And so we have, it's not, you know, yes, we have a sort of ethical imperative to sort of mitigate harms that might be caused on our platforms, but there's also, you know, a business imperative in that, like we need to be there. We need to build and maintain that trust with our customers. And so I think it's like self-governance is about doing things that are in our long-term interests as a company. In terms of your question of, like, what is one thing that I would want to see from governments when it comes to regulating AI, you know, I would sort of go back to building on what I was saying earlier about the Silicon Valley approach, or the tech sector's approach to prototype, test, and iterate. I'd love to see that mindset being taken in government as well. I have so many experiences from my time in government where it took us 4, 5, even 6 years to develop a policy around a particular technology, and by the time the policy came out, it was already irrelevant because the technology had already progressed so far from what we, you know, had originally designed. And so there are a lot of really interesting experiments happening around the world, ranging from the UK government to the United Arab Emirates to some of the Scandinavian countries in Northern Europe, around prototyping policy. Policy sandboxes is, you know, an increasing trend we're seeing, where you have an opportunity for technologies to be piloted within a sort of limited jurisdiction, and to see what the impacts are in real life, and then to try out different policy frameworks as well. And so I think that maybe I know we're out of time, so maybe I'll just leave that there as a thought and say that that the prototype, test, and iterate approach to building technology may also be valuable in the approach to regulating or governing technology.
That's great, Zvika. Thank you. That's a great answer. And I like your comment, policy is the floor and not the ceiling. So on that, I know there's so many more questions we could ask this fantastic panel, but I think I'll pass over to Cal.
Thank you so much, Tony. And I really want to also thank Dini, Zvika, and Suraj for taking, you know, the time out of their day today to really join us on this wonderful discussion. I think we've covered a number of really interesting and thought-provoking topics. So thank you all so much for taking part, and thank you to our audience as well. We have one more session left in the AI for Social Good Summit, which is the Policy Insights on Governance session. So this will be a synthesis of the kind of discussion points that were talked about today, but as well as the discussion points that were talked about in our previous session as well, bringing that all together for senior policymakers. And so that will be happening on the 26th of November. So coming up on the 26th of November. And then following that, we will have policy insight briefings on 2 policy insight briefings coming out for the AI for Social Good Summit. Lastly, I just want to give a quick note on how to sort of keep in touch with all of this through social media. You've got Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and the website there as well, where you can have a look at the report on AI for social good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and really looking forward to having you as part of our next and last session.